July 5, 2011. The verdict that shocked America. Casey Anthony, acquitted of murdering her 2-year-old daughter, Kaylee. The public was outraged. How could a jury ignore the overwhelming evidence? The chloroform searches, the smell of death in her car, the cadaver dogs, the hair with the death band, the air samples that detected human decomposition. It seemed impossible that she could walk free. But here's what the public didn't know then, and what most people still don't know today. Nearly every piece of scientific evidence that convinced America of Casey Anthony's guilt was either flawed, experimental, or completely fabricated. The chloroform searches that dominated headlines, they never happened. The prosecution claimed someone searched for chloroform 84 times on the Anthony family computer. After the trial ended, the software designer who created the analysis program admitted there was a critical bug in his code. The actual number of chloroform searches was 1. Just 1. Not 84. The error was discovered only after Casey Anthony had already been tried, convicted in public opinion, and labeled the most hated woman in America. The smell of death that supposedly proved decomposition in Casey's car? It was analyzed using experimental methods that had never been validated in any courtroom by a scientist whose techniques were so questionable that he was later removed from other high-profile cases. The cadaver dogs that alerted to the trunk and backyard? No human remains were ever found at either location. The hair analysis that claimed to show post-mortem root banding? It was experimental science that the FBI's own experts later distanced themselves from. The air samples that detected compounds consistent with human decomposition? The key compound that would definitively prove decomposition wasn't actually found. For more than a decade, Casey Anthony has been vilified as a child killer who escaped justice through legal technicalities. But the evidence tells a different story. The story of how untested forensic methods, experimental science, and technological errors combined to create a case built on a foundation of junk science. The story of how the justice system failed not just Casey Anthony, but the very concept of evidence-based prosecution. Tonight, we examine the forensic evidence that convinced America of guilt and reveal how nearly every piece of it was flawed, unreliable, or completely false. Before we dive into the forensic failures that defined the Casey Anthony case, make sure you're subscribed to The Investigation Room and hit that notification bell. Here at The Investigation Room, we examine cases where science, technology, and evidence tell a different story than public perception. The Casey Anthony case represents one of the most significant examples of junk science in modern American criminal justice. What happened in that courtroom wasn't just a miscarriage of justice for one defendant. It was a warning about how unvalidated forensic methods can dominate trials and shape public opinion, even when the science is completely wrong. New comprehensive investigations every week, analyzing the evidence that others overlook, questioning the science that others accept without scrutiny. Drop a like if you believe criminal prosecutions should be based on reliable science, not experimental methods and technological errors. And let me know in the comments what you think about the role of forensic science in high-profile cases. Because what we're about to reveal about the Casey Anthony prosecution will change how you think about evidence, experts, and the reliability of forensic testimony. Now, let's examine how junk science shaped one of the most controversial verdicts in American legal history. Kaylee Marie Anthony disappeared on June 16, 2008. She was 2 years old, a bright, beautiful toddler who lived with her mother Casey and her grandparents George and Cindy Anthony in Orlando, Florida. But Kaylee's disappearance wasn't reported to police until July 15th, nearly a month later, when Casey's mother Cindy called 911 Inches desperation. That delay would become central to the prosecution's case against Casey Anthony. How could a mother wait 31 days to report her child missing? The answer, according to prosecutors, was simple. Casey Anthony had killed her daughter and spent those 31 days trying to cover up the crime. The case captivated America like few others in recent memory. Nancy Grace turned it into a nightly obsession. Cable news devoted hundreds of hours to analysis and speculation. Social media buzzed with theories and accusations. Casey Anthony became the face of evil, the mother who killed her baby and partied while the body decomposed. When the case went to trial in 2011, the prosecution presented what seemed like overwhelming scientific evidence. Computer forensics showed extensive searches for chloroform and methods of killing. Chemical analysis detected the smell of human decomposition in Casey's car. Cadaver dogs alerted to the presence of human remains. Hair analysis showed evidence of post-mortem changes. Air samples confirmed the presence of compounds associated with decomposing bodies. It appeared to be a scientific slam dunk. But appearances can be deceiving, especially when the science itself is flawed, experimental, or outright wrong. The Casey Anthony case became a perfect storm of junk forensics, where experimental methods were presented as established science, where technological errors were accepted as reliable evidence, and where the pressure to solve a high-profile case led experts to overstate the significance of their findings. Casey Marie Anthony was born on March 19, 1986, in Warren, Ohio. Her family moved to Florida when she was young, and she grew up in Orlando. By all accounts, she was a typical teenager, though she had a sometimes strained relationship with her mother, Cindy. Casey became pregnant in late 2004, and Kaylee was born on August 9, 2005. The identity of Kaylee's father remained uncertain, something that would later become part of the prosecution's theory about Casey's supposed resentment toward her daughter. Casey was 19 when Kaylee was born, and she continued living with her parents while working various jobs and trying to maintain her social life. Friends described her as fun-loving and outgoing, but also noted that she seemed to struggle with the responsibilities of motherhood. The relationship between Casey and her mother, Cindy, was complicated. Cindy was deeply involved in Kaylee's care, sometimes seeming more like a parent than a grandmother. This dynamic created tension, with Cindy frequently criticizing Casey's parenting and Casey feeling undermined and controlled. The Anthony family also dealt with financial stress. George had struggled with employment and gambling problems. Cindy worked as a nurse but was supporting multiple family members. The house was filled with tension, arguments, and competing claims over who was really responsible for Kaylee's welfare. This family dysfunction would later be seized upon by prosecutors as evidence of Casey's motive for murder. They would argue that Casey saw Kaylee as an obstacle to her freedom and happiness, and that the stress of teenage motherhood had driven her to kill. But family dynamics and speculation about motive don't constitute scientific evidence. What convinced millions of Americans of Casey Anthony's guilt wasn't psychological theories or behavioral analysis. It was the forensic evidence. The computer searches, the decomposition analysis, the cadaver dogs, the hair testing, the air samples. Science seemed to prove beyond doubt that Casey Anthony had researched methods of killing, had transported her daughter's dead body in her car, and had attempted to cover up the crime. The problem is that the science was wrong. Not just flawed or incomplete, but fundamentally unreliable, and in some cases, completely fabricated due to technological errors that weren't discovered until after the trial ended. The chloroform searches became the centerpiece of the prosecution's case against Casey Anthony. During the trial, prosecution witnesses testified that someone had searched for chloroform 84 times on the Anthony family computer. The searches were presented as evidence that Casey Anthony had researched methods of killing her daughter. The media seized on this number: 84 searches for chloroform. It suggested obsession, planning, premeditation. How could there be an innocent explanation for 84 searches about a chemical that could be used to render someone unconscious or kill them? The prosecution argued this was the smoking gun that proved Casey Anthony had planned Kaylee's murder. Defense attorneys seemed unable to explain away such a damning piece of evidence. The chloroform searches became a focal point of media coverage and public outrage. But there was a problem. The 84 searches never happened. The number was wrong. Completely wrong. And this wasn't discovered until after the trial ended, after Casey Anthony had been acquitted, after she had been branded a child killer in the court of public opinion. The error came from a software bug in the computer forensics program used to analyze the Anthony family computer. John Bradley, the designer of the software called Cashback, discovered the error in his program after the trial concluded. What had happened was this. Someone had visited a website about chloroform once, just once. But the software had a bug that caused it to count every time the web page was accessed from the browser's cache, even if the user never actively visited the page again. Since web browsers automatically cache pages to improve loading times, the software mistakenly counted each cache access as a separate visit. The real number wasn't 84 searches for chloroform. It was one single visit to a website that mentioned chloroform. John Bradley was horrified when he discovered the error. He tried to contact the prosecution and defense teams to correct the record. But by then, the trial was over. The damage was done. Casey Anthony had been tried and convicted in public opinion based on evidence that didn't exist. The prosecution had built a significant part of their case around 84 chloroform searches that never happened. Even more troubling, defense attorneys had apparently accepted the 84 search figure without conducting their own independent analysis of the computer data. They cross-examined witnesses about the searches, seemingly accepting that the searches had occurred while arguing that Casey wasn't the one who conducted them. If the defense had performed their own computer forensics analysis, they would have discovered that there was only one chloroform-related website visit, not 84 searches. This wasn't just a minor error in a complex case. The chloroform searches were presented as key evidence of premeditation. Prosecutors argued that someone who searches for chloroform 84 times is someone who is planning to use it. The number made the searches appear obsessive and deliberate rather than casual or accidental. The difference between 84 searches and one website visit is the difference between evidence of planning and evidence of nothing particularly significant. John Bradley's software bug had transformed a single curious click into evidence of premeditated murder. The chloroform error reveals a fundamental problem with how forensic evidence is presented and accepted in courts. The prosecution presented the 84 search figure as established fact, derived from reliable computer forensics analysis. The defense apparently accepted this figure without independent verification. The judge allowed the testimony without questioning the methodology. The jury heard about 84 chloroform searches and reasonably concluded this was evidence of guilt. But none of the participants in the trial process had verified that the underlying software was reliable. None had demanded to see the source code or understand how the counting algorithm worked. The forensic analyst testified with confidence about the 84 searches, but apparently didn't understand that the software was double-counting cached page accesses. This case illustrates how technological complexity can obscure fundamental errors in forensic analysis. Computer forensics sounds sophisticated and reliable. Software-generated numbers appear objective and scientific. But if the software contains bugs, if the algorithms are flawed, if the methodology is unsound, then the entire analysis becomes worthless. The Casey Anthony case demonstrates how a simple software bug can become the foundation for a murder prosecution. What makes this even more troubling is that the chloroform evidence wasn't just wrong, it was prejudicial. The prosecution used the 84 searches to paint Casey Anthony as someone who had researched methods of killing her daughter. This evidence went directly to the question of intent and premeditation. If Casey Anthony had actually conducted 84 chloroform searches, it would indeed suggest planning and intent. But she hadn't. The evidence was fabricated by a software error. Yet this fabricated evidence influenced public perception, media coverage, and potentially the investigation itself. Detectives and prosecutors may have pursued certain theories and devoted resources to certain areas of investigation based on the belief that Casey Anthony had extensively researched chloroform. The ripple effects of this error extended far beyond the courtroom. John Bradley, the software designer, later testified in other cases about the importance of validating forensic software. He emphasized that computer forensics tools need rigorous testing and verification before being used in criminal cases. His experience with the Casey Anthony case made him an advocate for better standards in digital forensics. But his advocacy came too late for Casey Anthony. She had already been tried based on evidence that didn't exist. The chloroform searches that convinced America of her guilt were nothing more than a software bug. The prosecution had unknowingly built their case on a foundation of fabricated evidence, and the defense had failed to discover the error that could have changed everything. The second major pillar of the prosecution's case against Casey Anthony was the claim that her car contained evidence of human decomposition. This evidence came in multiple forms. The testimony of witnesses who smelled an odor in the car, chemical analysis of air samples from the trunk, and testimony from Dr. Arpad Vass, a forensic anthropologist, who claimed to have detected compounds associated with human decomposition. The prosecution argued that the smell in Casey Anthony's car was the unmistakable odor of human decomposition, and that this proved Kaylee's body had been transported in the trunk. Several witnesses testified about smelling a terrible odor coming from Casey's car in late June and early July 2008. Casey's father, George Anthony, who had worked in law enforcement, testified that he recognized the smell as human decomposition. A tow yard worker who retrieved the abandoned car also testified about the awful odor. These witness accounts seemed powerful and straightforward. Multiple people had smelled decomposition, and George Anthony had experience that qualified him to recognize the odor. But witness testimony about odors, even from experienced observers, is subjective and unreliable. Smells can be caused by many different sources. Cars can develop terrible odors from spilled food, dead animals, mechanical problems, or environmental factors. The fact that people smelled something awful in Casey's car didn't prove it was human decomposition, even though the witnesses believed that's what it was. However, the prosecution didn't rely solely on witness testimony. They also presented chemical analysis that they claimed scientifically confirmed the presence of human decomposition compounds in the car. This is where the case entered the realm of experimental forensic science, using methods that had never been validated in courtrooms and techniques that were still being developed by researchers. Dr. Arpad Vass, from Oak Ridge National Laboratory, was the prosecution's key witness on the decomposition evidence. Dr. Vass testified that he had analyzed air samples from Casey Anthony's car trunk and had detected chemical compounds consistent with human decomposition. His testimony was presented as cutting-edge forensic science, using advanced analytical techniques to detect microscopic evidence that traditional methods might miss. Dr. Vass explained that human decomposition produces specific chemical compounds in predictable patterns, and that his analysis had identified several of these compounds in the air samples from Casey's car. The prosecution presented this as definitive scientific proof that a human body had decomposed in the trunk of Casey Anthony's car. But there were serious problems with Dr. Vass's analysis and testimony. First, his decomposition research was experimental and had never been admitted as evidence in any American criminal trial before the Casey Anthony case. The techniques he used were still being developed and refined. The databases he relied on to identify decomposition compounds were proprietary and had not been subjected to peer review or independent validation. The prosecution was essentially using Casey Anthony's trial as a beta test for experimental forensic methods. Second, Dr. Vass's analysis was incomplete and selective. While he claimed to have detected compounds consistent with human decomposition, he failed to detect other compounds that should have been present if human decomposition had actually occurred in the car. Most significantly, he did not detect putrescine and cadaverine, two compounds that are among the most abundant and characteristic products of human decomposition. If Kaylee's body had decomposed in the trunk of Casey's car, these compounds should have been present in significant quantities. Third, Dr. Vass's methodology was questionable. He used proprietary databases and analytical techniques that were not disclosed to the defense team. The prosecution argued that this information was protected as trade secrets, but this meant the defense could not independently verify or challenge the analysis. In effect, the jury was asked to accept Dr. Vass's conclusions on faith without being able to examine the underlying data or methodology. Fourth, some of the compounds Dr. Vass claimed to have detected could have come from sources other than human decomposition. Organic compounds can be produced by decomposing plant matter, food waste, cleaning chemicals, or other environmental sources. Dr. Vass acknowledged this possibility, but argued that the specific combination of compounds he detected was consistent with human decomposition. However, without comprehensive databases of compounds from various decomposition sources, this conclusion was speculative rather than scientific. Perhaps most importantly, Dr. Vass failed to detect chloroform in the air samples, even though chloroform was supposedly central to the prosecution's theory of the case. If Casey Anthony had used chloroform to kill Kaylee, and if Kaylee's body had then decomposed in the car trunk, chloroform should have been detectable in the air samples. The absence of chloroform undermined both the chloroform theory and the decomposition theory. The prosecution tried to have it both ways, arguing that Casey had used chloroform to kill Kaylee and that Kaylee's body had decomposed in the car, but the chemical evidence didn't support either claim. The most damning problem with Dr. Vass's testimony was that he claimed to have detected compounds that indicated human decomposition, but he failed to find the one compound that would have definitively proven human decomposition had occurred. That compound was called putrescine, and it is produced in large quantities during human decomposition. If a human body had decomposed in Casey Anthony's car trunk, putrescine would have been present in easily detectable levels. Dr. Vass didn't find it. Instead, he claimed to have detected other compounds that he said were consistent with human decomposition, but this language was misleading. Being consistent with something is very different from proving that something occurred. Many compounds are consistent with human decomposition, but are also consistent with other sources. Dr. Vass's testimony gave the impression of scientific certainty, but his analysis actually provided no definitive proof that human decomposition had occurred in Casey Anthony's car. The experimental nature of Dr. Vass's methods became even more problematic after the Casey Anthony trial. In subsequent cases, courts began to question his techniques and conclusions. Some judges ruled that his decomposition analysis was not reliable enough to be admitted as evidence. Other forensic scientists criticized his methodology and questioned whether his techniques met scientific standards for courtroom testimony. Dr. Vass became a controversial figure in forensic science, with some experts arguing that his methods were scientifically valid, while others claimed they were experimental and unreliable. The Casey Anthony case became a cautionary tale about the use of experimental forensic science in criminal trials. The prosecution presented Dr. Vass's analysis as established science, but it was actually cutting-edge research that had not been validated through peer review or independent replication. The jury was asked to convict based on techniques that were still being developed and databases that were still being compiled. This represents a fundamental misuse of the scientific process. Scientific techniques should be thoroughly tested, validated, and accepted by the relevant scientific community before being used to determine guilt or innocence in criminal cases. The Casey Anthony prosecution used experimental science as if it were established fact, and this contributed to public confusion about the strength of the evidence against her. The prosecution's third major piece of evidence came from cadaver dogs that had allegedly detected the scent of human decomposition in Casey Anthony's car trunk and in the backyard of the Anthony family home. Cadaver dog evidence can be compelling because these animals are trained to detect specific scents associated with human remains, and their abilities often seem almost supernatural to jurors. The prosecution argued that the dog's alerts provided independent confirmation that Kaylee's body had been in both locations. But like the other forensic evidence in this case, the cadaver dog testimony was more complicated and less reliable than it appeared on the surface. Two different cadaver dogs were brought to examine Casey Anthony's car. Both dogs alerted to the trunk area, indicating they had detected scents associated with human decomposition. The dog's handlers testified that these alerts were positive indications of human remains. Similarly, cadaver dogs were brought to search the Anthony family backyard after investigators received tips about possible burial sites. The dogs alerted to several areas in the yard, leading investigators to conduct extensive excavations looking for Kaylee's remains. The prosecution presented these alerts as powerful evidence that human decomposition had occurred in both the car and the backyard. However, there were significant problems with how the cadaver dog evidence was interpreted and presented. First, and most importantly, no human remains were found in either location, despite extensive searches. The car trunk was thoroughly processed by forensic teams who found no physical evidence of human remains, no body fluids, no tissue, no bones, nothing that would confirm a human body had been in the trunk. The backyard excavations were similarly unsuccessful. Investigators dug up large portions of the Anthony family yard based on the dog's alerts, but found no evidence of human burial or remains. The absence of any physical evidence to corroborate the dog's alerts should have raised serious questions about the reliability of the canine testimony. Second, cadaver dogs can produce false positive alerts for various reasons. These dogs are trained to detect compounds associated with human decomposition. But similar compounds can be produced by decomposing animal remains, certain plants, or other organic materials. Dogs can also be influenced by their handlers' expectations or environmental factors that affect scent detection. The fact that the dogs alerted to specific locations doesn't prove that human remains were present. It only indicates that the dogs detected scents they had been trained to associate with human remains. Third, the cadaver dog searches were conducted weeks after Kaylee had disappeared and after Casey's car had been moved and processed by multiple people. If Kaylee's body had been in the car trunk, the scent evidence would have been contaminated by the time the dogs examined the vehicle. Similarly, if Kaylee had been buried in the backyard and later moved, the remaining scent evidence might not have been sufficient. for reliable detection. The prosecution's use of cadaver dog evidence exemplified a broader problem in the Casey Anthony case: the presentation of suggestive but inconclusive evidence, as if it were definitive proof of guilt. The dog's alerts were consistent with the prosecution's theory that Kaylee's body had been in the car and possibly buried in the backyard, but the alerts didn't prove this theory. Without physical evidence to corroborate the dog's findings, the alerts remained merely suggestive, not conclusive. The jury was left to decide whether to accept the dog's alerts as proof of human decomposition or to require additional evidence to support such a significant conclusion. What made the cadaver dog evidence even more problematic was the way it was integrated with the other forensic evidence. The prosecution argued that the dog's alerts corroborated Dr. Vass's chemical analysis and the witness testimony about odors in the car. They presented this as multiple independent lines of evidence, all pointing to the same conclusion: that Kaylee's body had decomposed in Casey's car. But this apparent corroboration was misleading because all three types of evidence suffered from similar reliability problems. The witness testimony was subjective. The chemical analysis was experimental and incomplete, and the cadaver dog alerts were not confirmed by physical evidence. Rather than truly independent confirmation, the prosecution had assembled three different types of suggestive but inconclusive evidence and presented them as mutually reinforcing proof. This is a common prosecutorial technique, but it can be misleading when the individual pieces of evidence are weak or unreliable. Multiple weak pieces of evidence don't necessarily add up to strong proof, especially when they all suffer from similar fundamental limitations. The cadaver dog evidence in the Casey Anthony case demonstrates the importance of requiring physical corroboration for forensic findings. Dogs are remarkable animals with incredible sensory abilities, but they are not infallible. Their alerts need to be confirmed by human investigators finding actual physical evidence. When dogs alert to the presence of human remains, but no remains are found, this should raise questions about the reliability of the alert, rather than being accepted as proof that remains were once present, but have since been moved or destroyed. The fourth major piece of forensic evidence presented by the prosecution was hair analysis that allegedly showed post-mortem changes, indicating that Kaylee Anthony was dead when a strand of her hair was deposited in Casey's car trunk. This evidence was based on analysis conducted by FBI forensic experts, who claimed they could determine whether hair had come from a living or dead person based on microscopic characteristics. The prosecution argued that this hair evidence provided scientific proof that Kaylee was dead and in Casey's car, supporting their theory that Casey had transported her daughter's body after killing her. The hair evidence seemed particularly compelling because it came from FBI laboratories and was presented by agents with impressive credentials and experience. The testimony suggested that forensic science had advanced to the point where experts could examine individual hairs and determine whether the person was alive or dead when the hair was deposited. This appeared to be objective, scientific evidence that could resolve questions about when and where Kaylee died. FBI forensic examiner Karen Lowe testified that she had examined a hair found in Casey Anthony's car trunk and determined that it exhibited characteristics consistent with post-mortem root banding. According to Lowe, this banding pattern occurs when hair comes from a deceased person and indicates that decomposition processes have begun. She testified that this finding suggested the hair had come from Kaylee after she had died. However, the post-mortem root banding analysis was another example of experimental forensic science being presented as established fact in the Casey Anthony trial. Post-mortem root banding was not a widely accepted or validated technique in forensic science. The FBI's own scientists had conducted limited research on this phenomenon, but it had not been subjected to extensive peer review or independent validation. The technique was still being developed and refined, and there was significant disagreement within the forensic science community about its reliability and significance. The prosecution was once again using experimental methods as if they were established science. More troubling, the FBI's analysis of post-mortem root banding was based on a very small database of samples. The agents who developed the technique had examined a limited number of hairs from known post-mortem sources and identified certain characteristics they believed indicated death. However, they had not conducted comprehensive studies to determine how often these characteristics appear in hairs from living people, how environmental factors might affect the banding patterns, or how reliable the technique was for determining time since death. The technique was based on observations rather than rigorous scientific validation. The hair analysis also suffered from the same problem as the other forensic evidence in the case. It was suggestive, but not definitive. Even if the FBI's technique was reliable, finding a hair with post-mortem characteristics in Casey's car didn't prove she had killed Kaylee. The hair could have been transferred to the car through innocent contact after Kaylee's death, or it could have exhibited post-mortem characteristics for reasons unrelated to the time of death. The prosecution treated the hair evidence as proof of guilt, but it was actually just another piece of circumstantial evidence that required interpretation and context. Following the Casey Anthony trial, the FBI's post-mortem root banding technique faced increased scrutiny from the forensic science community. Critics argued that the technique was not sufficiently validated for use in criminal trials, and that the FBI had overstated the significance of their findings. Some experts questioned whether post-mortem root banding could be reliably detected in single hairs, and whether environmental factors could produce similar banding patterns in hairs from living people. The technique became controversial within forensic science circles, with some laboratories discontinuing its use, while others continued to offer the analysis. The FBI eventually acknowledged some of the limitations of post-mortem root banding analysis and began providing more cautious testimony about its significance. In some subsequent cases, FBI experts testified that the technique could suggest, but not prove, that hair had come from a deceased person, and they acknowledged the experimental nature of the methodology. This more cautious approach came too late for the Casey Anthony case, where the FBI's analysis had been presented with much greater certainty and significance. The hair analysis controversy highlights a broader problem with how forensic evidence is developed and validated. Forensic techniques are often developed in law enforcement laboratories rather than academic research institutions, and they may be used in criminal cases before undergoing rigorous scientific validation. The pressure to solve high-profile cases can lead forensic experts to overstate the significance of their findings or to present experimental techniques as established science. This creates a risk that defendants will be convicted based on unreliable or unvalidated forensic methods. The Casey Anthony case represents a perfect storm of forensic failures, where multiple types of evidence were flawed, experimental, or completely fabricated, yet were presented to the jury as reliable scientific proof of guilt. The chloroform searches that never happened, the experimental decomposition analysis that found no definitive evidence of human remains, the cadaver dogs that alerted to locations where no remains were found, and the experimental hair analysis based on unvalidated techniques. Each piece of evidence had serious reliability problems, but together, they created an impression of overwhelming scientific proof that convinced the public, if not the jury, of Casey Anthony's guilt. What makes this case particularly troubling is that most of these problems were not apparent during the trial itself. The chloroform error wasn't discovered until after the trial ended. The experimental nature of Dr. Vass's decomposition analysis was obscured by technical jargon and impressive credentials. The lack of physical evidence to corroborate the cadaver dog's alerts was downplayed by prosecution arguments that the evidence had been moved or destroyed. The experimental nature of the FBI's hair analysis was not adequately explained to the jury. The defense team apparently failed to conduct independent verification of much of the forensic evidence, accepting prosecution claims about the reliability and significance of the scientific findings. This raises fundamental questions about how forensic evidence is presented and evaluated in criminal trials. The adversarial system assumes that both prosecution and defense teams will thoroughly examine and challenge scientific evidence. But this didn't happen effectively in the Casey Anthony case. The prosecution presented experimental science as established fact, while the defense failed to conduct adequate independent analysis to expose the weaknesses in the forensic testimony. The judge allowed experimental techniques to be presented without adequate foundation or validation. The jury was asked to evaluate complex scientific evidence without sufficient information about its reliability and limitations. The Casey Anthony case also demonstrates how media coverage can amplify the apparent significance of flawed forensic evidence. The 84 chloroform searches became a central part of the media narrative about the case, even though they never happened. The decomposition analysis was presented as definitive proof of guilt, even though it was experimental and inconclusive. The cadaver dog alerts were treated as confirmation of the prosecution's theory, even though no physical evidence was found to support the alerts. Media coverage rarely includes the kind of detailed scientific analysis that would reveal the limitations and problems with forensic evidence, so the public received a distorted impression of the strength of the case against Casey Anthony. The jury's decision to acquit Casey Anthony was met with widespread public outrage, but viewed from the perspective of the forensic evidence, the verdict appears more reasonable. The jurors were asked to convict based on chloroform searches that didn't happen, decomposition analysis that was experimental and inconclusive, cadaver dog alerts that weren't confirmed by physical evidence, and hair analysis based on unvalidated techniques. When examined critically, the scientific evidence against Casey Anthony was much weaker than it appeared on the surface. The jury may have reached the correct verdict based on the evidence they were presented, even though the public believed the evidence was overwhelming. This doesn't mean Casey Anthony was innocent of killing her daughter. It means the prosecution failed to prove her guilt with reliable scientific evidence. The distinction is important because it highlights the burden of proof in criminal cases and the importance of basing convictions on solid evidence rather than suspicion, speculation, or flawed forensic analysis. The Casey Anthony case serves as a warning about the dangers of allowing experimental science and unreliable techniques to dominate criminal prosecutions. The forensic failures in the Casey Anthony case have had lasting impacts on criminal justice and forensic science. The chloroform error led to increased scrutiny of computer forensic software and demands for better validation of digital analysis tools. John Bradley, the software designer who discovered the bug, became an advocate for improved standards in computer forensics, emphasizing the need for rigorous testing and validation of forensic software before it's used in criminal cases. The error also highlighted the importance of defense teams conducting independent analysis of digital evidence rather than accepting prosecution claims about computer forensics findings. Dr. Arpad Vass's experimental decomposition analysis faced increased criticism following the Casey Anthony trial. Some courts began excluding his testimony, ruling that his techniques were not sufficiently reliable for criminal prosecutions. Other forensic scientists questioned his methodology and called for better validation of decomposition analysis techniques. The controversy surrounding Dr. Vass's work contributed to broader discussions about the use of experimental science in criminal trials and the need for better standards for admitting novel forensic evidence. The cadaver dog evidence raised questions about how canine alerts should be interpreted and presented in criminal cases. Some experts argued that cadaver dog alerts should not be admitted as evidence unless they are corroborated by physical findings of human remains. Others maintained that properly trained dogs can provide valuable evidence even when physical remains are not recovered. The debate continues within the forensic science community, but the Casey Anthony case demonstrated the importance of not overstating the significance of cadaver dog alerts. The FBI's post-mortem root banding analysis became controversial following the Casey Anthony trial, with some experts questioning its scientific foundation and reliability. The FBI began providing more cautious testimony about the technique in subsequent cases, acknowledging its limitations and experimental nature. The controversy contributed to broader reforms in FBI forensic practices and increased scrutiny of hair analysis techniques in general. Perhaps most importantly, the Casey Anthony case highlighted the need for better education and training for judges, attorneys, and jurors about forensic science. The technical complexity of modern forensic evidence can make it difficult for legal professionals to evaluate its reliability and significance. The case demonstrated that impressive credentials and sophisticated terminology can obscure fundamental problems with forensic analysis, and that the adversarial system doesn't always ensure adequate scrutiny of scientific evidence. The case also raised questions about the role of media coverage in high-profile criminal cases. The extensive media attention focused on the most sensational aspects of the evidence, such as the chloroform searches and the smell of death, without adequate analysis of the scientific reliability of these findings. Media coverage created public expectations about the strength of the evidence that didn't match the reality of what was presented in court. This contributed to the public outrage when Casey Anthony was acquitted, even though the jury may have reached the correct verdict based on the evidence. The Casey Anthony case serves as a cautionary tale about the dangers of allowing junk science to dominate criminal prosecutions. The use of experimental techniques, unvalidated software, and incomplete analysis created an impression of scientific certainty that was completely unfounded. The prosecution presented evidence that appeared overwhelming, but was actually deeply flawed. The defense failed to conduct adequate independent analysis to expose these flaws. The media amplified the apparent significance of unreliable evidence. The result was a case where public perception of guilt was based largely on evidence that was experimental, incomplete, or completely fabricated. More than a decade after the Casey Anthony trial, the case continues to influence discussions about forensic science, media coverage of criminal cases, and the reliability of expert testimony. The chloroform error has become a textbook example of how software bugs can create false evidence, and it's used in training programs for computer forensics analysts to emphasize the importance of validating analytical tools. The decomposition analysis controversy has contributed to increased scrutiny of experimental forensic techniques and calls for better standards for admitting novel scientific evidence in criminal trials. The case has also influenced how defense attorneys approach forensic evidence in high-profile cases. The Casey Anthony defense team's failure to conduct adequate independent analysis of the computer evidence and other forensic findings has become a cautionary tale for defense lawyers. Many now routinely hire their own forensic experts to verify prosecution claims about scientific evidence rather than accepting them at face value. The case has contributed to increased awareness among defense attorneys about the importance of challenging forensic evidence and understanding the limitations of forensic techniques. For prosecutors, the Casey Anthony case has highlighted the dangers of building cases around experimental or unreliable forensic evidence. The prosecution's reliance on techniques that were later discredited or found to be flawed has served as a warning about the importance of ensuring that scientific evidence is solid before making it central to a criminal case. Some prosecutors have become more cautious about using cutting-edge forensic techniques that haven't been thoroughly validated, while others have invested more resources in understanding and verifying scientific evidence before presenting it in court. The case has also contributed to ongoing reforms in forensic science. The National Academy of Sciences Report on Forensic Science, published in 2009, called for better validation of forensic techniques and improved standards for expert testimony. The Casey Anthony case provided examples of many of the problems identified in that report, including the use of techniques that lacked scientific foundation, inadequate validation of forensic methods, and overstated expert testimony. The case has been cited in discussions about forensic science reform and has contributed to increased awareness of the need for better standards in forensic laboratories. Perhaps most significantly, the Casey Anthony case has changed public awareness of the limitations and problems with forensic evidence. The revelation that the chloroform searches never happened shocked many people who had followed the case and believed the evidence was solid. The discovery that other forensic evidence was experimental or unreliable has contributed to increased skepticism about forensic testimony and greater awareness of the need to scrutinize scientific evidence in criminal cases. The case has become an example of how impressive-sounding forensic evidence can be fundamentally flawed, and it has contributed to more critical evaluation of expert testimony in high-profile cases. The case continues to be studied in law schools and forensic science programs as an example of how multiple types of evidence can be simultaneously flawed, creating a cumulative impression of guilt that is not supported by reliable science. It demonstrates how the complexity of modern forensic evidence can obscure fundamental problems with analytical techniques, and how the pressure to solve high-profile cases can lead to the misuse of experimental science. The Casey Anthony case serves as a reminder that criminal convictions should be based on reliable evidence rather than impressive credentials, sophisticated terminology, or public pressure for resolution. The Casey Anthony case represents one of the most significant examples of junk science in modern American criminal justice. Nearly every major piece of forensic evidence presented by the prosecution was flawed, experimental, or completely fabricated due to technological errors. The chloroform searches that convinced America of Casey's guilt never happened. The decomposition analysis was experimental science that failed to find definitive evidence of human remains. The cadaver dogs alerted to locations where no physical evidence was found. The hair analysis was based on unvalidated techniques that were still being developed. Yet this collection of unreliable evidence created such a powerful impression of guilt that Casey Anthony became one of the most hated people in America. The case demonstrates how junk science can dominate criminal prosecutions when proper safeguards are not in place. Experimental techniques were presented as established science. Software bugs were accepted as reliable evidence. Subjective interpretations were treated as objective facts. The adversarial system failed to provide adequate scrutiny of the forensic evidence, and the media amplified flawed findings without critical analysis. The result was a prosecution built on a foundation of unreliable science that convinced the public, but could not convince a jury that examined the evidence more carefully. The jury's decision to acquit Casey Anthony was met with widespread outrage, but it may have been the correct verdict based on the evidence presented. The jurors were asked to convict based on chloroform searches that didn't happen, decomposition evidence that was inconclusive, cadaver dog alerts that were not confirmed by physical evidence, and hair analysis based on experimental techniques. When the forensic evidence is examined critically, the prosecution's case appears much weaker than the public believed. The jury may have reached the right conclusion, even though their verdict was deeply unpopular. The Casey Anthony case serves as a warning about the dangers of allowing unvalidated forensic techniques to influence criminal prosecutions. Science is powerful and can provide crucial evidence in criminal cases, but it must be reliable science based on validated methods and sound analytical techniques. When experimental science is presented as established fact, when software bugs create false evidence, when subjective interpretations are treated as objective proof, the entire justice system is undermined. Defendants may be wrongly convicted, guilty parties may escape justice, and public confidence in the legal system is eroded. More than a decade after the trial, the forensic failures in the Casey Anthony case continue to influence discussions about science, justice, and the reliability of expert testimony. The case has contributed to reforms in computer forensics, increased scrutiny of experimental techniques, and greater awareness of the limitations of forensic evidence. It has changed how defense attorneys approach scientific evidence and has made prosecutors more cautious about building cases around unvalidated techniques. Most importantly, it has increased public awareness of the problems with junk science in criminal cases and the importance of demanding reliable evidence before accepting conclusions about guilt or innocence. The Casey Anthony case reminds us that science is not infallible, that experts can be wrong, and that impressive credentials and sophisticated techniques cannot substitute for sound methodology and careful analysis. In the pursuit of justice, we must be willing to acknowledge when scientific evidence is flawed, to correct errors when they are discovered, and to demand better standards for forensic testimony. The case serves as both a cautionary tale and a call for reform, demonstrating the need for reliable science in criminal justice and the dangers of allowing junk science to shape legal outcomes. Casey Anthony was acquitted of murdering her daughter, but she was convicted in the court of public opinion, based on evidence that was largely unreliable. Whether she was actually guilty or innocent of killing Kaylee, the prosecution failed to prove her guilt with solid scientific evidence. The case demonstrates that criminal justice must be based on reliable proof rather than speculation, experimental techniques, or software errors. Only by demanding better standards for forensic evidence can we ensure that justice is based on truth rather than junk science. Thank you for watching this investigation into the forensic failures that shaped one of America's most controversial criminal cases. If you believe criminal prosecutions should be based on reliable science rather than experimental techniques and technological errors, subscribe to The Investigation Room right now. Hit that notification bell so you never miss our investigations into cases where the science tells a different story than public perception. Share this video with anyone who wants to understand how junk science can dominate criminal cases and influence public opinion. And let me know in the comments, do you think the jury reached the correct verdict in the Casey Anthony case based on the actual evidence presented? The forensic evidence that convinced America of Casey Anthony's guilt was fundamentally flawed. The science that seemed so compelling was actually experimental, incomplete, or completely fabricated. Justice requires reliable evidence, not impressive-sounding testimony from experts using unvalidated techniques. The Casey Anthony case serves as a reminder that we must demand better science in criminal justice and remain skeptical of forensic evidence that sounds too good to be true. Asterisk. Asterisk. Final word count. 8,000 words. Asterisk. Asterisk.